Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. I have one quick administrative announcement before we hand it over to our speaker to kick off this session. This session has been pre-qualified to support continuing education requirements for several cybersecurity certifications. If you are a member seeking attendance documentation, please be sure to scan your badge at the scanner located in the back of the seating area at the conclusion of this session. Scanner shut off 15 minutes post-session, so please get your badge scanned before networking with the speaker. Also note that to qualify for CEUs or CPEs, the session must run a full 60 minutes. That 60 minutes can include Q&A, so please have questions ready for the speaker to fill the time requirement. Full details on the continuing education program are available on the TechNet Cyber app and the conference website. Thank you, and now over to our speaker.
Good morning, everyone. Check, check, 1, 2, check. Ding, ding, ding. So my name's Frank Bergoglio. I'm the federal CTO here at SailPoint. I've spent over 2 decades working with defense and federal agencies, basically only on security and identity management, compliance, and most recently, zero trust. My focus is helping organizations modernize and how they govern access across users, systems, and devices, and environments. The idea is to do this without compromising mission readiness and operational speed. And we'll be talking about that. That's what this conversation is about. It's not a wire diagram. It's not a solution architecture. What it is how identity applies across the zero trust model, how it applies to things like audit, the Federation Hub, SASE, XDR, and basically the mission partner environment, all things identity related. I want to bring your attention to the strategic role of identity security in DoD cyber readiness. And in this time, in this current climate, we have doing more with less, but keeping our agility and mission readiness. It works. So we're going to focus, like I said, on the strategic aspect of identity governance and administration. Some of you may be familiar with part of what I'll be talking about, and that's the account, the automated account provisioning platform within the DoD ICAM architecture. We'll also be talking about cybersecurity and compliance and readiness. Readiness for the audit. Why did DoD step into this a few years ago? To modernize the ICAM environment, but also to solve some significant findings within the fire audit process. And then it was recognized that ICAM, and most specifically the automated account provisioning and things we do around visibility, compliance, and control affect the entire readiness of the identity ecosystem. The DoD operates in a complex, federated environment, many fragmented identity solutions. We think of how we've been managing the mission partner, our strategic Five Eye community for several years. It's without visibility, without compliance, without control. And standing up an environment to manage these users took time and didn't come without risk. We'll also be talking about the operational ROI. What is the strategic value, both from a cybersecurity cost and efficiency perspective? And then we are going to talk about the identity maturity model and the zero trust maturity model, and how those two collide and provide value. Sorry, this clicker is sensitive. Identity governance turns complexity into control. And when we think about identity, historically we think this is hard. We're solving an efficiency problem, but it's hard to do. The key is when we're integrated properly, we're integrated deep into the applications, we provide significant value. And those boxes in green are some of the significant outcomes of the DoD ICAM program in all environments, where we're looking at mitigating identity-related threats. That is first and foremost. We're reducing audit risk. When we think of audit risk, some of the findings are usually orphaned accounts. They're overprivileged accounts. They're overprivileged orphaned accounts, and that creates us a huge problem. But all of this improves our cyber operational resilience. We're automating control, we're enforcing controls, and enhancing visibility and monitoring. If you've sat through one of the many zero trust conversations, we talk about visibility and control a lot, but that is a key aspect of what we provide. So when we align what we're doing in identity specifically to zero trust, and I like to get this out of the way early, is centralized in the identity pillar. Identity provides that foundation of SOD enforcement, continuous access certification, that continuous visibility. Across the device pillar, we ensure the linkage of the human to the device. In the network layer, we're routing the segmentation. Where can I go? What can I do within the application? How do I get access to that application? Is it through a set of attributes, or do I actually need a profile provisioned? Same thing with data. We're ensuring the right people have the right access at the right time through attributes, through data-driven, through dynamic assignments. And analytics, we're creating the visibility. And automation and orchestration, how do we close the loop? How do we create the identity? How do we enforce the control? And when I do something stupid, how do we remove me? Whether we're talking about the zero trust strategy, the ICAM strategy, the risk management framework, the fire audit process, NIST 853, 63, identity is the foundation of all of those. And most importantly, the outcomes that I mentioned before are critical to all of those. So sorry about that. We kind of talked about some of these, but when we talk about the joint and coalition environments and we're bringing things in via federation, we still need that visibility, we still need the control, we still need to enforce policies, we still need to have that closed loop, not just a set of attributes that we understand about a user, because in a lot of cases we don't control those attributes. We don't have the provenance of those attributes. Even if they're coming from DMDC or DEERS, we don't have the provenance of those attributes because they may hit multiple authoritative data sources. So when we look at enforcing zero trust and cybersecurity policies, we could have blind spots. And then when we have to answer the auditor of how Frank got access, what can Frank do? How do we answer that? Identity governance specifically gives us that activity, that access insight, that history where, and I'll make this statement a little bit later, but I'll steal my own thunder, audit shouldn't be reactionary. It should just be part of the system, and we should be able to point the auditor to the artifacts within the identity governance solution. This is what the Fortune 100 banks are doing. This is what the Fortune 100 insurance companies are doing. This is what the DoD should be doing. We're talking about the same types of systems that we're auditing with the same sensitivity to mission readiness as they are their own business. I just did a solution session on non-humans and non-person identities and the supply chain, third-party users, and I wanted to bring that into this discussion because we don't hear about this often in the DoD ICAM program, and it is something that is extremely critical. It is a blind spot, so I wanted to bring that to the attention of this presentation as well. And we're also doing this while we're modernizing our architecture. We're moving to the cloud. We have programs like Comply to Connect, XDR, SASE. Identity lays across all of this, and we're going to talk about that. So as I said, this conversation is going to be about measurable ROI, embedding security into every access decision. And it begins with the identity, right? It all starts there. And we're not talking about just a control mechanism. We're talking about built-in design. And this is foundational. Sorry about that. This is going to be a, I think, recurring theme of me not being able to press this button. So we're talking about high impact value across both missions and readiness. Strategically, identity accelerates onboarding for mission partners, onboarding for employees, contractors. We get a CAT card, hopefully within the first 30 days or so, sometimes longer, sometimes shorter. But when do we actually get the access that we need? Sometimes that can be a while. We're automating the SAR process. That's one of the first steps. That process today is not closing the loop, though, fully. And that's what we need to do. From onboarding the identity with a CAC in hand, we should be, by birthright access, immediately assigning the things I need to do my job based on things we know about me. That requires attribute provenance. That requires the assurance that we know who I am, we have validated, and we're confident that those new keys to the kingdom are being evaluated appropriately, and that we're also watching that access. Am I doing things I should be doing? Am I operating within the boundaries? Does my account have the right level of access? Am I over-provisioned, under-provisioned? All of these are critically important, and they strengthen the readiness by streamlining the evidence, really, of what I have access to. And that's where the resilient audit process comes into play. I can go to one place and see my access history over time. And when we think about that at scale within the department, when you can see when I came on board as Seaman Frank Pagulio, which I was at one point, you could follow me through those 9 years, theoretically, and see all the access I was granted over that time. When the access was removed, I was promoted, I was transferred. All of that should be very easily visible and audit. Think of the admiral or the general that goes out to Pearl Harbor and he leaves DISA, he goes out to Pearl Harbor. Well, we should be removing access from DISA and granting access somewhere out in Pearl Harbor. That should be a natural process that his executive assistant can go in and say, Admiral Frank Pagulio, boy, would I love that, now has entitlements and his files and his directories where he needs them without issue. So when we look at the pillars of ROI, these things aren't new topics. These are outcomes across existing systems that we think about all the time. Some of the ones that stand out are the audit readiness. What's the strategic impact to that? That's reducing findings, but that audit of users may also result in license savings as well. If I no longer need access to an application, we should no longer be paying for that. The Doge folks in the room will love me for making that statement, right? And that's kind of why we're not doing a wire diagram. Like I said, in our current climate, we have to think differently about how we're delivering identity and the value that it provides, because it's not just a strategic enabler, it's a business enabler. So when we dig down, even deeper in some of these, reducing the risk, insider threat mitigation, breach avoidance, most importantly, though, mission uptime, right, and availability. And I think that's one of those key things that we tend to, we hope for, but we never fully operationalize when we look at the outcomes. Identity is a control plane. It connects people. It connects policies to people. And it associates the risks of those people to the environment. As I said, how many of us have been in the department over 5 years? You've probably transferred. You've probably been promoted. You've moved offices. This is a simple identity use case. But when we're talking about applying that to the strategic value and sensitivity of mission systems that I may have access to, I used the example in my previous session. One time I had a bunch of CAT cards, and they'll sit in my drawer at home where I didn't turn them in. That meant my certificates were probably still valid for a couple months before anyone realized I was no longer on the project. Maybe it waited until my certs were expired or revoked. That's an active account. That's a risk. That's an orphaned account. And this is really what we're talking about here, is reducing that threat and vulnerability. So when we look across some of the programs that I talked about, we think of, Comply to Connect is all about the device. It's about the user interaction with that device too. How do we marry the device to a human? You might understand my device ID, but what about me? A SOC doesn't understand Frank, doesn't understand the impact I have or risk to the organization. So by tying the identity to that device and the suitability of the identity, we can have access control with confidence. When we look across microsegmentation, we can secure our cloud-based systems with confidence. When we look to the Federation Hub, where we're talking about speed, we're talking about coalition access, we're talking about mission readiness, but we need that control. We need that visibility. When the mission is over, how do we reduce that risk? How do we reduce the footprint of access? And then XDR, we're taking in those threat signals. How do we respond to them? When we tie the identity to the threat signal, we can immediately remove access and not wait. So the first thing we are going to talk about is federation, because this is a common theme we're seeing, and there's a lot of value that goes into this. Mission agility, compliance, risk, and efficiency. We're turning authentication into true access governance, and that really is the visibility and control of the identity once we've authenticated. It doesn't matter how I authenticate, where I authenticate from, there's a set of attributes that come with me and follow me. But how are we granting access, and where should we be? We need to have, as I said, that access history over time. I need to be able to remove Frank, whether I'm just in time or federated. We still need to be able to remove and block my access. And that all comes from the control plane that we talked about. So we're putting the policy at the perimeter, and we're integrating federation and IGA for mission readiness and readiness, access, and success. In ABAC, we use attributes to grant access. Those are the new keys to the kingdom. But we have fragmented solutions that aren't all the same. And we're moving towards this model of federation where we can onboard our business partners, our mission partners, our 5I community. We're establishing trust models with them, but we still need to control access. And we still need to answer those guys once a year of who's in the system, how they got it, and should they still have it. So without identity governance, as I mentioned, audit readiness, or with identity governance, at the core, audit readiness becomes a continuous state, not a scramble. How many of you are involved in any kind of audit identity-related mission system? So no, financial management systems. Yeah, it is a huge challenge. So when we build the right controls, the right processes in place, we can control these across all applications, all systems. And it's not just proving you can pass an audit, it proves you're already ready for it. And I think that's what we're really trying to get the department to recognize and move towards, is that audit readiness, audit preparedness steps. So when we look at some of the capabilities, some of the challenges that are faced, these are very similar to the cyber risk, where we need to perform access reviews. We have SOD violations, dormant accounts, identity gaps, no audit trail, and static compliance. That doesn't meet our mission needs, and that's where identity governance comes into play. So by delivering process automation, near real-time enforcement, automated deprovisioning, reprovisioning, continuous logging, continuous monitoring, we're reducing not only the cybersecurity risk, but the audit problem as well. And I thought I'd wake you up this morning and talk specifically about audit findings. No, just kidding. But this is important. This is actually important. When we think about the IGA functionality and all those controls that need to be met, we look at controls a lot of times as a one and done. We get them accomplished for our ATO process. And then a year later, we have to go prove that we actually used those controls, implemented the processes that were tested. We still struggle with some of the simple ones. And the reason why I created this slide was so we could have a visual in one place where folks could see this is just a small amount of the controls. There's actually about 100 that we can apply to within 853. And that's just basic implementation of identity governance across all the areas of 853. There's several in 863. There's several in this 2070 trust. Identity is very strategically important. So why is all this important and why does it matter? I think we've talked to this. Zero Trust demands it. Operationally, we're going to operationalize the control frameworks and provide that additional layer of security and confidence. But we're talking about accelerating DoD mission, things that are important to the DoD today. And that Zero Trust, that's audit, that's comply to connect, that's XDR, that's SASE. All the things that you hear and you see walking around the floor here is all very critical. So the next thing that we're going to talk about is maturity, because without maturity, we can't get there. And you hear frequently rather, we're going to get to this dynamic ABAC model. And because we're doing identity today, it's going to be easy. That's not necessarily the case. So we're going to unpack this a little bit and we're going to dig down deeper into it. We've started with the CAC 26 years ago. I still had black hair. I had just taken off my uniform and went to work for a little PKI vendor, and had the opportunity to build some of the certificate profiles in the CAC program. So I've kind of matured with this model as well. But that's telling. We've been doing this for a long time, but don't read ahead. We're only at level 3, maybe 4, within the department today. We start out with basic PKI validation, some local account provisioning, but we had baseline access, so we were meeting the credentialing requirements. We moved on, and We did a little more manual provision and tracking. Accounts are created in local systems, typically by IT administrators, help desk, limited oversight. May have had the SAR that was filled out and got thrown in a drawer and disappeared for a year until we had to do an audit. We didn't have a lot of SOD enforcement. We still have some of these problems as well, by the way. But we had minimal account lifecycle visibility, spreadsheet tracking. Basically, what we're talking about is high overhead, and that leads to vulnerability. I'm going to blow this up. Is that a little better to oh, come on. That might be a little better to see. So we're at level 3 today, and this is where some of the challenges do come in, is that we're trying to get to that level 6. And in the level 3, we're getting centralized data from DMDC, DEERS, we're building GFUD, we're starting to correlate system access, we're building some light triggers for the joiner, mover, lever process. So like I talked about the use case of the Admiral going to Pearl Harbor. We have not automated things like that today. I think we're still pretty far off of that. But we're starting to get improved visibility, manual traceability. We're still doing some reporting in systems now rather than files out of a drawer. The next step for the department is to automate these things and to complete the automation of them, whether we're talking about financial management systems, mission systems, operational readiness type applications. As we do that, we need to build the attribute foundation a little stronger, build more dynamic roles and policies. The access request, that SAR, the ESAR, whatever we're calling it in the various different uniform services, those attributes in the SAR form can now be used to audit and to enforce SOD policies. So we're getting to that reduction of risk, solving some of the provisioning delays, and improving the audit posture. Identity-centric zero trust, level 5. We're already doing some of those activities in level 5. We're doing XDR. We're doing SASE. We're doing Comply to Connect. There's still some identity aspect missing there, like I said. And that's some of the value that the department is missing. When we think of tools like Zscaler, or we think of CrowdStrike data, or Forescout at the edge doing Comply to Connect, they're operating blind. They're operating with hidden identities. They're operating in an environment where there's not a lot of visibility and control of the true risk of an identity. So in order to get to level 5, and that's where we start to step into the optimal level of zero trust, we need to have the integration with things like the Federation Hub tighter. Yes, that's an identity platform, but it's only doing authentication. It's doing authorization from maybe a group level, but not a control or function level of what I can actually perform. So in order to get beyond that, we're tying these identity layers together. And when we tie them together, we can start enabling some of that zero trust enforcement and improving the cyber resilience. And level 6, that is utopia. I think, I wish Randy Resnick was here because he would say yes, he loves this model. But really, that's what we're talking about, having AI-driven analytics that are driving proactive decisions. We're enforcing the governance controls from cradle to grave. We're taking in those identity threat detection signals and taking action on the identity immediately from any system I have access to. We're doing things like predictive access modeling, what access should look like, what do the anomalies look like, How do we detect them? How do we enforce them? How do we control them? And that leads us to just-in-time access, the utopia of zero trust. And it gives us the continuous compliance analytics that the fire auditors and the bean counters will love to see. And that will give us the predictive autonomous identity governance with the measurable risk reduction. So when we look at the mission critical insights, like I said, this is from risk to readiness. It gives us the foundation for the zero trust. It gives us integration with our mission partners, enables the mission agility, increases the cybersecurity and compliance value. It enforces least privilege. And we hear this buzz term all the time. The identity community's been using that term, by the way, for 30 years. But like I said, it's the visibility and control that we gain out of this that leads to that audit efficiency and that annual cost savings, whether it's an audit process or just a dollar amount gathered from other efficiencies, licensing, risk reduction. It can be significant. When we think of what it takes to prepare for an audit, how much we pay, the Deloittes, the KPMGs to come in and perform the audit, if we're providing them the artifacts that they need and the proof of the process, that's going to significantly reduce the cost to the department. All of this starts with that maturity model that we talked about and recognizing and adopting an identity maturity model that goes along with that zero trust maturity model. I'm going to pause now because I just spewed out a ton. So I'm going to take a little bit of a sip of water, but I'd like to ask some questions now, take some questions from you all, and see where we're at. Does anyone have any questions so far? Lively crowd this morning. Was all this Greek? I mean, did I just speak a foreign language? I hope not.
I've got a question for you.
Awesome.
Actually, two questions. One is your first couple of slides used words like reduce, all the way back up. I think maybe it was slide number 2. Sorry, that's a long way to go.
Especially with this button.
You need a new button.
IT guys, this thing sucks.
It was before all the audit stuff. But anyway, there's a lot of words which is trying to get to level 6 is what you show later. But it's reducing, here it is, improving and enforcing, enhance, accelerate, enable, mitigate. I don't see the word eliminate. So when will we get to level 6, when all this is eliminated? Because I had a CAC card 20 years ago, and they're still using CAC cards. Zero Trust and ICAM have been around for a long time, and we don't seem to be getting to that next level. We still have breaches in security. And then the second question, you touched on it, but maybe you can talk a little bit more, is the non-human identities and how those are then complied, how they have the compliance met, all the standards that are there when there's no human involved. And that was the whole idea, was proving who the human is that is signed in, that's trying to get into your systems.
So those are two great questions. The credential is one thing. The credential proves maybe I am who I say I am if I have that pin that goes along with it. But it doesn't say what I can do. And that's one of the biggest problems. And I will take a little hit for this because I've been doing this for so long. One of the things we did a really bad job at, and this is just the industry in general, is we stop at Active Directory. And I was a Microsoft guy at one time too, so I can take that hit also. But, just because I have an account and I'm an active user that doesn't authorize me. The authorization is what can I do within that application? And we tended to stop at a group membership and we said, well, that's a role. And we put a bunch of people into a group and we used that group as a role. But we never said this role, we may have assigned the higher level of control, but not what button can I click on? What task individual executable can I run, let's say? And that's why Zero Trust scares the living daylights out of me, because we still operate in that model in some places, right? And we're repaving the cow path. But, the modernization of identity gets into the actual control of what I can do. And that is key. And that may come from tagging a piece of data with a classification level, but I have to marry that somewhere. And it shouldn't be at a group level. I'm in the secret squirrel group. Well, how did I get in the secret squirrel group? And has something changed about me where I should be removed from the secret squirrel group? And that's where that lifecycle automation, where that's the term attribute provenance. We're taking the authoritative data, we're injecting that into an access model that says Frank is a secret squirrel, and Zero Trust says we're going to check that value of secret squirrel membership every time I touch a piece of data. And those were the pieces we've missed. We've taken too many shortcuts over time and said, hey, we have this great firewall, we're air gapped. Well, how's that worked for us? We had a contractor roam around an intelligence agency getting moved from group to group to group to group into a new OU, ask his buddy for permissions. Hey, put me in this OU, create this group for me, assign permissions to it. Major insider threat, but no one was watching. That's what governance does. We have capabilities now available to us called native change control. So if an attribute about me changes, it triggers an alert. It triggers an action. And that's that step at level 6 where we need to get, where we're looking at the identity indicators of compromise that aren't just the fact that I failed a login. How many people have failed login 5 times because you keep pressing the wrong button, right? That's a good one. But what about if daily, weekly, my attributes are changing? Who's watching that? We don't watch that very closely. All of a sudden, and we're using these in dynamic access policies. That's utopia, remember? We're gonna build this set of queries, questions and answers. What's the value of this attribute? Well, if my attributes are changing frequently, that's an indicator of potential compromise. How many people's access changes frequently? Not really. It's access is pretty standard for a role, especially if you're in the military. You have a certain set of access that you're going to have, and it's going to flow with you. It needs to move geolocation-wise and things like that. But if I'm a SIGINT analyst, I'm a SIGINT analyst. I have a clearance level. It better not change. And if that clearance level does change, my access should change right along with it. As soon as that flag about me changes, my access to the data should change. And that's where building the maturity into this whole process around identity gives me the visibility. I'm going to go back to it. Compliance. We're going to be able to have checkboxes and audit trails, and control. We're going to be able to enforce it. And if something does change, I'm going to get removed from it. And I think that comes close to answering the third party, right? Look at the vulnerabilities we've had in some of our intellectual property we've lost to nation states. It's amazing that the F-35 looks just like one of our nation state jets. And why is that, right? It's enforcing that third party access that down to that control level. from the authentication, not just the credential, but once you prove that credential, there's that authorization layer that gets now wrapped around the data itself, deeper in the application, not just at the front door. When I invite you to my house, I let you in my front door. I don't let you in my bedroom. We can go to the backyard, we can go to the living room, we can go to the pool room, but you're not going to go upstairs, right? And we kind of stopped at the front door and said, we're real secure. You're inside our air-gapped wall. But then I started exfilling data out. And those are the kinds of controls that we're trying to step back at now and go, okay, there's probably someone sitting in here already, and we need to go find them. The kids are hiding under the bed upstairs in the bedroom, and we need to get them out. Any other questions? Hopefully I answered your question, sir.
So a few questions, and I'll step away so others can also ask after each one, just to be fair. But you called out DEERS as ultimately authoritative source for a lot of identity information. I've been working to roll out a single sign-on within my own organization, federating to Cloud One because we're under Air Force for it. But how do I get access to DEERS attributes and the like? Because Cloud One will send some things, it will not send other things. How do I actually grab this? Because, the process of figuring that out over the last year or so has been fascinating as here's a wonderful roadmap. And but actually, how do I, grab that?
Yeah. So give Kit Howell a call and tell him Frank sent you, and then run. No, there is some seriousness to that. Yeah. So each of the services does pull a feed from DEERS, right? And I think the challenge that you're probably facing is what the Army's facing, some of the other MILDEPs are facing, is the data is not as current, right? And that goes back to that provenance statement I made. Attributes need to be timely. And one of the challenge is they're not always timely. My understanding through some of the conversations I've been having recently because of user offboarding, I don't know if that's one of the things that, So we can commiserate. And that is just the process of DMDC and how they end a relationship or change the status of an attribute. My understanding is it can take up to 2 weeks. And that's not the bad contractor that didn't turn in his badge. That's the official process, is that attribute doesn't become available for you to immediately remove someone. Now, I will say, if you were to not rely just on that DEERS data and you had governance and control, an administrator of your organization could go, I know Frank left today, the big red button, right? Let's just go disable him. Doesn't matter when that attribute changed, you have localized control.
So for our use case, we do have both internal and external users, and that's where the challenge is. So for any internal, great, our security department can track that. We have offboarding. But when we talk about external, so if we say, I have someone from FBI or elsewhere in DoD, when do they offboard? I don't know.
So that is an interesting one, right? And that goes to... And this is really important because there's a reason why I'm talking about the Federation Hub, because this is coming up in a lot of conversations. This thing is just wonderful. All right, it's this next one. Federation Hub is blue. Okay, that's the authentication layer. I believe in your organization it's Okta. Okay, or getting there maybe in the Air Force. The pink is the governance layer. When we're doing a federated identity, I don't have to come from internal, I can come from external. When we do that, when I authenticate, I still get a profile connected. But we're just looking at it as I've authenticated, okay, you have this claim in the assertion, and we're going to send you right to the application. Well, how do we sever that? When we add the governance layer, unbeknownst to the user, they get a governed account now. So we start tracking their access history over time. When we're done with them, we shut them down. So the next time they come in, we go, nope, he's still shut down. Let's put him through another step of action first. So there's that other part of it that we're starting to skip over. And that's the risk. So we can time bomb an identity. If they don't authenticate, Okta can send us a message and say, hey, or any, Microsoft can, I mean, it's just integration between the authentication layer and the governance layer. I haven't seen Frank in 6 hours. Disable him, right? We're going to go in and we're going to set a flag. We're going to disable your account. When you come back in, we'll go, yep, okay, he's still active. Turn him back on. So it's an integration with the governance layer, I think, is partially what you're challenged with. I'm guessing.
That one ish. So that gets the individual application layer, and definitely something we're rolling through. And if anyone has other questions, otherwise I'll.
These are all good. So keep going.
Yeah. So the other big one I've had running through Federation, because, yay CACs, yay different attributes you can have on tokens and the like, and sometimes you have the requirements to go in with weaker auth. But we've hit issues with the question of Federation of they aren't always the best at actually telling you the authorization levels for that. So it's great. Did this person come with a CAC? Did they come with a dedicated admin token? Did they come in with an ECA? Did they come in with a whatever the common shared cert thing is that companies can self-attest to? Did they come in with username password?
So in a SAML assertion, you can identify PKI versus password.
Yes.
But to your point, what PKI level?
And are they sending it?
Exactly. and that's a limitation of the SAML configuration, right? So one thing that you could do is when the trust is established via the IDP back to or via the SP interface back to the IDP, you could say, hey, mission partner, and I'm just, air quoting whoever it might be, we want to also know what level of certificate, and then add that into the assertion or into the claim, and then have a control based on that claim based on, so you could get I'm assuming we're talking IAL levels and things like that, so.
And making sure that can potentially pass through.
Yeah, those attributes flow downstream.
Yeah, because with OIDC, ACR lets you get more granular, but you have to agree what the numbers mean.
Exactly.
And I guess then also, because you called out SAML, so when you're federating, how continuous is continuous for verification? Because OIDC has, it's well known, here is your refresh and the like, but are you actually passing that through? Are we cool with it? They logged in today and they'll log in tomorrow, because a lot of the times we say,
I mean, SAML does not handle that very well. Are you familiar with the IPSI protocol that's under development?
No.
So IPSI is the first instantiation that we're going to have of a standard where you will be able to do common logout across systems.
Okay.
And the authentication vendors are just, I mean, literally, we're talking a standard that's being burned as we speak. But the authentication vendors are stepping out with IPSI and making claims that they can do it. I haven't seen it in the wild yet.
Given the degree,
and it's IPSIE, by the way.
Thank you. Given the degree I've seen applications implement even SAML logout or doing authorization, I admit I'm skeptical.
Absolutely. We can close our browser and open our browser back up and still have a session until it times out, and that's a bad thing, right? We need to get better at that, and that's why IPSI and shared signals and all these things are going to glue the ecosystem together a little tighter. But most importantly, we haven't seen you in a certain amount of time is probably the best backup. Right, where that we can control outside of, I did authenticate a while ago, and now someone timed me out. I had an experience yesterday getting into OneDrive where my corporate policy timed me out in the 30 minutes I went to the bathroom and came back to my iPad. I got completely locked out and I had disconnected, and even though I was reading a disconnected file offline, the policy still applied. So congratulations, Microsoft and SailPoint, but you really made my life uncomfortable for a little bit, where I had to get back online, re-authenticate, and that's what I didn't like, right? Was if you think about that in a tactical environment where I lose my signal and all of a sudden Microsoft is telling me you can't open this file and find the battle plan. You know, that's a bad thing. That's a bad thing.
Yeah. Thank you.
Absolutely. I believe we're close to time, if not over time. I think we were, I don't even know. Brendan.
Could I have a question, Mr. Bergoglio?
Absolutely.
Your last speech really got me thinking about the machine, bots, agents, everything that we have going on. And then I started tying that into the cloud. And I've been doing a lot of research on Wiz and tools that'll give you visibility about what's going on in your cloud and vulnerabilities, risks, threats, everything, right? What about marrying the two of those together? Because Wiz will show you the visibility problems, but when it comes to automation and getting back into the HR systems and making changes and workflows and all of that, that's where you're still going to need a SailPoint or a tool to make those cloud just-in-time provisioning changes.
Absolutely.
But you put that together with thousands. You said 8,000 bots or machines are in your environment.
Oh, yeah. From the previous.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So could you talk a bit about like how you can marry the two together? And, you know, Wiz partners with CyberArk, for example, on making those changes. SailPoint, I know, has cloud tools to make changes in the cloud. But if 8,000 of them are bots and agents, how do you, that's just a lot to deal with. And, what are you giving just in time to a bunch of bots?
It's happening today.
Well, I'm confused about all that.
So that's closing the loop. And that's that maturity level 6, where we are taking signals. There is a whole industry, another industry body that's working on shared signals in the cybersecurity ecosystem, where these types of signals via standard will be able to be passed and consumed by the various different platforms. So, CrowdStrike, for example, detects a risk. Wiz detects a risk. We've been doing this in the identity community via API and simple messaging for a long time. We're just flipping a bit. But the modernization of that is Wiz via API would send that signal to SailPoint, and we would then take action on that signal. So if Brendan did something he shouldn't, even in your Beyond Trust PAM, it's the same thing, where you identify something I did inadvertently while I'm in session. You can drop the session, but you can't disable my account. So you're going to send me we dropped Brendan's session. The SOC guy has no idea who Brendan is. We just know we dropped B. Kruk, and we know the risk to Brendan, and we are going to then go in and take that signal and remove or disable all of your access across the enterprise. And then if you think about that, let's take that a step further. The forensics analyst needs to go back and say, who is this Brendan guy? How did he get all this access where he was able to go do this? The governance layer has the proof points. We used this attribute. We provisioned him in this role. He was granted this entitlement, and that's how he got there. Oh, and by the way, this attribute changed, and it happened over the last 2 years. So it really is closing that loop when we think of the NIST CSF, identify, protect, detect, respond, recover. That respond is really big. And identity is frequently overlooked as being an automation engine, and that's a mistake, because we are the automation engine for the identity context across all pillars. So thanks, Brendan. Great question. Anyone else? Nope. Going. I think we're at time. I think we're good. And this thing is sticky buttons.